we kept kind of touching about TV shows, bro, and Vince Russo and comparisons to WCW. But now we can get into who killed WCW. And I wanted to bring this back to recap with you guys because I wanted your perspective and to bounce off, ideas and comments with you guys instead of just, talking to myself in the ether and just kind of going over the segment. So we basically can start here. I think Who Killed WCW had, for the folks who haven't watched the other episodes, I recorded 2 this past month. The first episode 12 was covering 1 and 2, and then episode 13 was covering 3 and 4. And it basically covered the entire history of WCW in a bite-sized way. It's not necessarily giving you every single detail that happens. If you want to have the full story, the WCW book I think it's just called Nitro. That is about like 600 pages long, and it goes into a lot of detail about the booking, the business decisions, a lot of details about the advertisers and issues with wrestlers. They had scans of wrestlers' contracts and all that kind of stuff. That was it's very interesting stuff, and I'm almost done with the book. I've been reading it in my backyard.
Oh, you own this book?
I own it as an ebook. I have it on my Kindle.
I'm gonna go to the library and rent it.
Yeah, I mean it's a really good book. If you are a wrestling history buff or really like just learning about wrestling history, I think it's absolutely a must read. And they released a 2021 version. The original one came, I think, 2018 or something like that. The 2021 version is expanded and has additional details and chapters. So that's the one I have, and yeah, really good book. But Who Killed WCW? I don't think we want to go episode. Open it up to you guys about the series in general. What did you guys get out of it? You know what? Let me start with that question, and I'll have you guys all answer, and I'll do round robin. I'll start with you, David. Who killed WCW?
The network.
The network.
Because no matter what they did, do good or bad, they hated on it.
Yeah.
So it's just you want it to die, let it die as ugly as fucking possible.
Yeah. What about you, Andres? Who do you think killed WCW?
I agree with the network thing, but I gotta say, probably everybody's ego did. There's just so much in-house disagreements and stuff like that, and there was a lot of good wrestling talent that was just not getting, the spots they should have gotten. Contract deals and stuff like that, moving around like that. So I'd say it was everyone had a good portion of that, especially the talent, especially the the Hogans and the Nashes and stuff. But it's just funny because WCW has been gone for so long, and there's been other documentaries on it too. Even WWE has produced their own other I remember seeing their own DVDs about the end of Nitro or the end of WCW as a whole, and it's a lot of stuff there wasn't necessarily a lot of newer stuff that came out, but it was interesting to see them all kind of come together and talk about it. But it's just it was just funny seeing some of them all blame each other.
Yes.
It's he did that. No, I didn't do that.
And they just kind of let them hang themselves. They gave the rope and let them hang them. Their responses, and they shot it with this person thought it was this, and the other person was, Kevin Nash was talking about the finger poke of doom and that kind of stuff. And I feel like there were a lot of what about it, certain segments of these episodes. But we talked about Vince Russo. Chris, who do you think killed WCW, and why is it Vince Russo?
Dwayne Johnson killed WCW.
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of memes too out of this documentary, because now you have the screenshot of Dwayne Johnson basically creating, the Constitution of the United States to killing WCW, creating Thunder.
I think honestly, Hulk Hogan is the double-edged sword where they were doing fucking amazing because they brought him in and they started an NWO, but he was also the motherfucker that was like, well, this shit ain't gonna work at this point. I need to be champion. I need to do this, this, and that. And that specific creative control. I guess you could even throw Eric Bischoff in there because he's like, whatever, like we'll put it in the contract, like you're immune, you have creative control over your character. So but I would say it's mostly Hulk Hogan because I feel like if it went specific directions, I think the network would still see some kind of a value in it, even if they don't like wrestling. But like if it was like, man, everybody loves this shit, like obviously if the numbers are speaking, then they're gonna keep it. So I would say fucking Hulk Hogan, that piece of shit.
Well, okay, so no one interestingly mentioned Vince Russo, but do you guys feel
like him too?
But I feel hand in the downfall of WCW.
It's like a butterfly effect. I feel like maybe they wouldn't even need Vince Russo to come in if the direction up until that point was like kicking WWF's ass, because that once it started to whatever year that was, 97, 98, whenever Sting, I guess, did he become champion? I think he became champion and then he lost it, I think, on Nitro, right? I think from that specific moment when stuff started to just kind of go off the rails, I think that's the main issue. And then I don't think they would ever have to bring in Vince Russo because they're like, all right, what can we do to ramp it up again? And they're like, oh, Vince Russo. So butterfly effect. I think if Hulk Hogan wasn't a piece of shit and he just did what he needed to do, and then Eric was in full control of what NWO was and what WCW was or Nitro was, I think it would have been in a better position. But
yeah, I mean, I do think it is death of a thousand cuts when it comes to WCW's downfall. I think I'll agree with you, David, though. I think primarily the issue was the networks and the executives, and they just didn't like wrestling from the get-go. In the shows, they talked about this, and in the book, they make a big point about the perception of wrestling as lowbrow, people who are low earning, uneducated, just country bumpkins who watch, wrestling. And the only person who is kind of defending WCW and is Ted Turner, who's in charge of, that specific company. And then, the merger happened and he basically became a figurehead and they pushed him to the side. So that perception of that wrestling isn't great for our product, it stuck around that entire era in those years. So once they had that reason to kick it off, that's what they did. So I do think that a lot of it was the executive's fault, and the hesitancy about like making it a more risque product, because Vince McMahon did not have to follow any of those kind of strict orders, because USA Network was totally down as long as their ratings were going up. But with WCW and them being under that TBS, TNT, Warner, AOL umbrella, they felt like they had to bring it back to a family product in 1998. In 99, when it was like peak Jerry Springer Attitude Era, and they saw that the ratings were going up, but their logic was, they would rather have, instead of a 5.1 rating and minimal advertisers, they'd rather have like a 2.1 and, a whole bunch of advertisers who would want to, put their product on during commercial breaks. So I think that was a big issue. But again, I think it is death of a thousand cuts. You had all those wrestlers, guaranteed contracts, not giving a shit, creative control. I feel like people now, I mean, Mercedes has creative control. I'm sure John Cena and people like The Rock and all those. It's not like they're just gonna be like, oh, here's a script, sir, and then just go out and do this. I'm sure they all have their say when it comes to their stories, but yeah, I don't know. I think that is part of it. Um, But yeah, what any other thoughts? So what do you think about Vince Russo and booking? Do you feel like he was ever a good writer or storyteller? Do you feel like it was mainly Vince McMahon and Vince Russo was kind of
I
I
think
don't
he
know.
just had all the right pieces in WWE for the green light that he had, because it's
Yeah,
just like how hard is it to write for Stone Cold when he's literally Stone Cold, and you just have to be like, hey, Steve, tonight drink beer, then stun, and then drink more beer.
yeah,
And like, or even like DX, like, oh, hey, what's your guys' plan tonight? Okay, cool, make sure you guys moon somebody.
Whip
Sweet.
your
yep.
dick out. No.
I'm a genius. Like,
He wasn't writing Shakespeare.
we're writing television, bro.
Television show, bro.
I
Yeah.
mean, he also had that Vince McMahon filter too.
Yeah. So I
And
mean, yeah. I mean,
and
he
wasn't
had to
The
answer
Rock,
him.
The Rock's like right hand man was part of that writing team, wasn't he?
He was well. I don't know if he was his right hand man at the time, but he was writing The Rock's lines and stuff. Brian Gewirtz.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So
he was
like he
writing
was
for
on the team.
SmackDown, and then he was writing for Raw, and he was head writer for a bit. And then he left in 2012, and then after he left, he was still The Rock's writer in a number of shows like Young Rock. He's basically kind of been at the hip ever since. And now when he's back in WWE, they have him as a writer who's collaborating with everyone else when it comes to The Rock. So, I mean, it's kind of it feels like a similar evolved idea to what Hulk Hogan had as his, creative control. It's just executed differently, and I think the personality, like the is also wanting to elevate the talent. And I think it's also in part because he's a board member, so it's also a product that he wants to see succeed. It's not necessarily, I just want to have the belt and, be on top, because I don't think that's his mindset at all. I mean, he's in top matches because how can you not be? You're the Rock, but it's not like I have to keep winning every single time, or look completely dominant. But yeah, I think it's just a different animal. So I'm not completely opposed to creative control and those guaranteed contracts and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it helped with the egos that were there during the 90s.
Especially when you look at
Scott Hall and Kevin Nash.
like Hulk Hogan being the guy. I mean, that was the top 80s wrestler. He had movies, he had all these things. I mean, it came down to personality. And then with that, all the business that came with that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've talked about this before, like with WCW. Do you see any parallel in WCW when it comes to the product or how they run the business or, talent interactions? Do you feel like there's any kind of parallels to each other?
You said with AEW because you cut off?
With AEW, yeah.
Okay. I mean, like apart from kind of being the second show to WWE at this point, I mean, there's some similarity. I mean, you could definitely look at some parallels, decisions that are made, certain stories that are being parallels, but I think you could say that the NWO thing has been done across many platforms, many wrestling shows. I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, you can make some parallels there.
Are
Yeah.
yeah. You
I'm
were
sorry. I
saying.
can see some, but not too many, luckily.
Yeah.
But but I think maybe in some ways, like because obviously we're aware of what happened there, so they're probably looking to not like obviously go the same route with a lot of things. But I'm sure there's still some parallels, but nothing too concerning.
Mm-hmm. And what did you guys think? So let's move on to that last episode of Who Killed WCW. And we see in the episode the never before seen footage of the last show of Nitro, where it was outside. It was in Panama City, I think. That was the city that was WCW in, and that's where Shane McMahon showed up um, on television with the simulcast with Monday Night Raw. What did you guys think of that, like, never before seen footage? And I talked about this in our previous episode of corporate espionage being tossed around when they were talking about selling WCW, because there was a specific point within the episodes about WCW being sold to Fusion Media, and Eric Bischoff was talking about how he wanted to sell this brand to another company at a point while it still has some value. So that entire discussion about selling it to this company, and they were going to basically start a new, like, basically reboot WCW, and they were going to have was it called the Big Bang, was the pay-per-view. They were going to have all of that was basically lined up, and then somewhere along the line that basically fell through, and they said that it wasn't happening, and then WWF at the time sold the product, or WWF bought WCW for basically chump change in their entire library, and all the talents that wanted to come over. Any thoughts about that? When they were talking to the executives and the episode in general.
It's crazy, like how important TV deal was back then.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it was interesting seeing the camera people and then even the talent themselves when they were being recorded. It's honestly also wild that it's like footage that no one has ever seen before, and it kind of feels like it just happened because no one has seen it before. It's like, I don't know, finding a $5 bill in your mattress or something. I don't know. When it comes to like seeing like these different angles show that you've seen hundreds of times in WWE's framework, but it's camera people, it's producers. There were also some wrestlers in the background talking, and folks weren't necessarily sure what was going to happen. But yeah, it was a very like sobering and just kind of like an interesting view.
Yeah, I felt
Of
like I was having my
Yeah.
last day too. Like I was like, shit, man, Vince is coming.
Yeah.
Like, damn, he's gonna be here tomorrow, huh?
No, it was really cool though to see because I actually was in Miami when that episode aired. So I think I was like, I don't know how far away, but I remember like watching the crossover and not knowing like that was a thing. Because
Mhm.
obviously today's day might if something were to happen like that, we probably would know a little bit. Everything leaking now, but yeah, no, it was cool seeing that footage. Because I do remember that show very vividly because it was such a big moment as a wrestling fan.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, it was cool. I actually enjoyed seeing that. Like, cause I always actually wondered that too. I'm like seeing the ins and outs behind the scenes of that specific day too, because especially when you find out word of who was coming too. I was like, oh shit, like that's cool to see.
Yeah. So basically, WCW got purchased by WWE, marks the end of an era. Lots of the top stars from WCW were absorbed by WWE, and then we had that whole invasion storyline. What did you guys think about the invasion storyline? And I didn't really see it when it originally aired. When I got back into wrestling, I watched they talked about it a lot. Sorry. Yeah.
I watched
yeah.
the entirety of that. I was actually like actively watching wrestling during that time. Well, being a kid, I still enjoyed it for what it was. I mean, obviously, you didn't have like the A-listers, then you had the dream matches that we were hoping to get.
Right.
Like obviously the actual NWO versus DX in its prime, not 20 years later when they're all like very old and stuff. And but the inclusion of having like the kids in the McMahon family like going against their dad, that actually helped a lot, despite them not having all those AAA listers in their side for WCW. Like I actually watched like, what was it? The final pay-per-view, which was like if they won, they actually were going to take over WWE. I forgot what it was called.
I think it was just called Invasion.
Was it called Invasion? Okay.
Invasion.
So yeah, like I remember like that. And Paul Heyman was part of it too. He was
Survivor Series is where the winner take it all.
Oh, Survivor Series. Okay. Yeah, and then they had ECW involvement too. I mean, I think it really helped a lot elevate that, considering what it could have been. No, it was a good time. I actually like I said, the big guys were not part of it, but still for what they did with it, I think they still did a very good job telling the story of it. Having the kids involved, having Paul Heyman part of it, ECW's involvement, it was good. It's good to see Chuck Palumbo part of that.
Chuck Palumbo, Booker T.
Booker T was good on that.
Booker T was the best acquirement from WCW, bar none.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was funny because I actually kind of low-key expected Jericho to betray them too, because he was already in WWE before. But for some reason I was like, oh, maybe he'll go back to that side. I don't know why, but I just felt like he would have.
Right.
Because he was not there super long yet,
Yeah, only like 2 years at that point.
Yeah.
Or a year. But
actually, Triple H wasn't even part of that either.
He was hurt.
Yeah.
He was out.
Yeah.
I do think it like from my perception, it did kind of hurt it because they didn't have Hogan or Nash or Hall. And they're like the Eric Bischoff too. Ooh, sorry. But then Eric Bischoff eventually shows up. Was it 2003, 4? I think it was 2003, where they announced Eric Bischoff as the general manager. That was probably crazy for people seeing that.
I remember seeing that as a kid, like live. And I just remember like not believing anything going on anymore.
like WCW was actually never sold and they were just like behind it the whole time. Like that like him shaking his hand and then becoming the Raw general manager, I think it was like 2.5 years. I mean, that was good TV. And the way that I like when it was actually split brands with like Stephanie McMahon and then Eric Bischoff. That was like I really enjoyed that era of TV for WWE. But yeah, I think when it comes to the WCW documentary, the Who Killed WCW documentary, it did a lot of stuff well. It was well produced. The stuff that was kind of new were the interactions with the executive producers and those discussions, which were interesting. But there was also some retread that you kind of heard from like the WWE documentaries. And that's like the Vince Russo commentary and Eric Bischoff getting into WCW and how that started. And the finger poke of doom and that kind of stuff. I totally forgot about that blood hitting like to the right of Kevin Nash. I totally forgot about that. But yeah, that's pretty bad too.
Didn't they try it like twice or some shit?
Yes, I'm pretty sure.
So. Yeah. And each time it was failed.
Here's a question: When did Eric Bischoff start going gray? Because like at one moment he's got black hair, and then like specifically in WWE,
WCW he had gray hair.
Did he? And then he just dyed it, and then he's like, "I'm gonna dye it."
He just dyed it.
Went back to Ken doll.
Interesting. That's the real question.
It That was a
real
good
stuff that
time though
keeps
when
you
he
up.
came to WCW as like an active like general manager. Like I did enjoy that because then when he got paired up with Stone Cold for a while too, right?
And Stone Cold would just like they would just like piss each other off,
Yeah,
like
that was a good
reversing
time.
their own calls and all that.
Yeah, that was good shit. And this is our next segment is kind of